Let's have a quick look at Ansible. So Ansible's role is to configure a variety of machines according to the group that they're in and the roles and tasks defined for that group. One machine can be multiple groups, and the way we start is we make an inventory of the machines and which groups that they're in. So I have two machines, this one and this one, so I'm going to copy these addresses and make an inventory. Inventory represents the resources, which are machines in this case. And I'm going to make maybe two different categories. I'll make one category, demo app, but the brackets make a group or a category. So you can put various IP addresses in each group, and that indicates what this machine's purpose is. So we then define some files in Ansible format that will say for each of these machines, really depending on the group that they're in, go set up all this stuff for this group and go set up all this other stuff for this other group. And what stuff can include is making users, making files, installing packages, configuring services, and restarting services. You can let machines know about each other, like put their IP addresses in config files so they can talk to each other and all sorts of stuff. So I'll show you a list of things that can support. So we have an inventory now. That's what that looks like. With that, we can actually run some commands just directly and have them run against all the machines in the inventory. To do that, we'll run a command called Ansible. The second command we'll use is Ansible playbook, but I haven't made a playbook yet. Before I do that, though, I need to actually connect to these machines manually because SSH is going to ask me about the key or about the fingerprint of the machine, if I trust it or not. And I want to get past that because Ansible, there might be a command option to make it behave better, but it gets stuck on that stage. So I'm going to first just connect directly with my key. So this is the part I have to get past. I'll say yes, and I'm in. And these are fresh machines, so not configured to do anything yet. And do it again with the other one. Okay, so now I can run an Ansible command like use my inventory, use my private key, the user has to be EC2 user, and demo app is the group I want to connect to. And now I can say like run a particular command, so ls root, just show the files. And you'll see that it does it to both machines. Here's the first machine, 34224, and the second machine. So that's running Ansible as a single command. What I really want to do is have a playbook. Now the purpose of a playbook is to make sometimes, probably more often than not, quite complicated configurations that will be run on the machines. And Ansible is designed such that you can rerun the playbook multiple times and it won't make changes if everything is in the same state it was before. So if you have a playbook, for example, that creates users, the second time you run it, it will see the users are already there and it won't try to create them twice, which would produce errors. Or if you're copying files, it'll see the files already there, or packages have already been installed and so forth. So it's more declarative in the sense of in most cases, you're not telling Ansible the procedures to follow to do something. You're telling Ansible what state you want the system to be in after it's finished. So you're declaring the state instead of listing procedure. So we're going to start with a file called site.yaml, which is YML. Ansible uses the YAML format instead of like JSON. And in here we say, so the YAML files, we'll start with that. And we'll say, this is the, we can have different kind of tasks in here. So we'll say, let's configure Flask, and who gets that? All hosts. We're going to have to become root so it'll use sudo to do the steps because we're going to have to install packages, for example. And the roles that we'll define to do this configuration for Flask will be defined in the Flask directory. We can make a list of roles if necessary. And then a second thing that we can do, I won't install the Notes app, but I won't complete this one because we've already done that in the video with the class. But you could define, specific, we'll say like, demo app. So you could say, for example, this group of hosts, which may not be all hosts. So see, I have all up here. This would be like common configuration stuff. And then down here, it'd be only a certain group in the inventory. And this time I don't need become true because I don't have to be root to copy files and start the demo app. I won't actually write code for that one just to save time, but you can mix in multiple tasks here. So next, we need to actually define the role that I said, which was Flask. So we're going to need to make a directory hierarchy that Ansible can understand. And to show you that, I want to show you the documentation for Ansible, just so you can see all the, the complete hierarchy that it supports. The documentation is actually somewhat difficult to find in my experience. Ansible is owned by Red Hat, which is owned by IBM, and they have a product called Tower, which is related, but I found when I was using Google, I was constantly getting to kind of the wrong set of documentation. It was going to their commercial product, Tower, most often. I want the open source Ansible documentation. So I found that docs.ansible.com is what you want, because at least in this case, Ansible project documentation is first, whereas Tower stuff is second. So it's less confusing. They have also a thing called Galaxy. You'll click Ansible documentation here, and you'll get to this site. So this is the site you want. Even then, it's still, I think, too confusing to find, like, what do I write in the files? There's all this extra documentation that is not relevant if you're just getting started. So to help you navigate that, what you want to go to first is, actually I don't remember how I got to it, but I guess sample, how did I get to this? User guide sample, using Ansible. So it's under user guide, and then advanced features, traditional table of contents is what they call it. Okay. And then, where's the sample? Way at the bottom. Sample. So this is how I got to this spot. And it talks about the directory layout. So let's look at this. So can I collapse this? I can't collapse that. So the directory hierarchy for Ansible is important to understand. They have a pretty complex example here, but let's talk through it. Here are two inventory files, so you can have multiple inventories. So you might have a bunch of IP addresses for production machines and a bunch for staging machines, which is like machines that are going to get the new code before production gets it. Or you can have one file with groups. Now you can have variables that match the group or the machine, like the host name. So I'm not going to show you variables, except show you their examples, but I'm not going to type in the variables. But you can have variables defined in your site file or elsewhere that get maybe plugged into a template, for example. A template would be like the HTML templates with Flask. They're Jinja files, Jinja 2, and you can mix in variables with other things. So if you have a configuration file for a database or something, you can say parts of this configuration file are variables, and that variable will be dependent on if I'm a staging machine or a production machine. So you can define variables in these files. I'll ignore this stuff. I haven't personally used it. Here's the site file. So we're still in the root folder, like the main Ansible folder. Then you have, so I'll skip this stuff too. Then you have a roles directory. So we want site and we want roles. Inside roles, there's a directory for each role. And I made a role called Flask. I think it was just called Flask. So I'm just going to have one folder, but you would often see like a common folder, which are things that every machine's going to get, and then specific roles. Inside the roles folder, inside the folder representing that particular role, you're going to have more folders. These folders are going to be tasks, at least, and you might have other stuff like templates or more variables specific to the role, or some other stuff that I haven't really seen before. So inside roles, inside the role name, inside tasks, you're gonna have a main YAML file, and that says what to do for that role, like what to install. Templates would be like config files. Notice they need to have a J2 extension for Jinja 2. So it's a regular Linux config file, but it's actually got like variables or something inside of it. So it's a Jinja 2 template technically. And you might have a files folder if you just have files you literally want to copy over to the machine. Not templates, just files. And the rest, I don't really see much. So in our case, we're going to say, make the roles. We have one role called Flask. And we have a task folder. And then we're going to make a main.yaml. It says what to do for this role. Let me look at what I created before. So in here you give a sequence of things to do, and each will have a name, like describe what this thing is. And in this case, we're going to run the package command. Say package called Python3 needs to have a state of present. If it's already there, great. If it's not, it will have to install it. And now that Python3 has been installed, we'll say install Flask, which is a pip package. So it's not the same command package. It's now called pip. And that's, it's like we're running pip install Flask. And just to be sure it doesn't use pip from Python version 2, we'll say the executable for pip is called pip3. And you can obviously have very extensive YAML files that have lots of different tasks. So that's our simple example. And when we run it, instead of running this command, you know what? Actually, probably need to back out of this folder. Okay, so let's look at our folders real fast. Inside the main folder, we have our inventory file and our site. And then we have a roles directory, which has Flask, which has inside of that, task, which has inside of that, the file. So see that structure. Okay, so instead of running the Ansible command, I'll run Ansible playbook, Ansible-playbook. And I don't say which command to run. It'll know which command if I give it the site. So it'll look at the site and then open the inventory, and my site says which machines get which roles. So it'll proceed to do the commands. So it says, okay, I'm going to run the playbook Flask config. That was the first one in our site. And inside Flask config role, there is a task called install Python3. It did that. You see, changed means it did install Python3. Install Flask also changed. You run it again, it should say OK instead of changed. So that means nothing's changed, like nothing's happened. It saw Python3 and Flask were already present, so it had nothing to do. So what else can you do besides like install a package or run pip? So on the documentation, you want to go to collection index. I'm not exactly sure why they call it a collection, but these are the major groups of functionality you can put in your tasks. A lot of these are not relevant to us. If we were using Google Cloud, maybe that would be relevant. They might have some AWS, Amazon AWS. So if we go to that one, we can see the kinds of commands we can run. We can start and stop EC2 instances and so forth using Ansible, which might be pretty interesting. But mostly what you're going to stick with, or perhaps completely, would be the built-in ones. So go to the Ansible built-in collection, and then there's some things you might put in the site file, but primarily what we're interested in is the modules. So these modules are like the functions you can put in the tasks. So package, for example, says generic OS package manager. So it'll look at the machine it's on, if it's got apt or yum or whatever, different ways to install packages. So what that supports is you give it a name and a state. So for example, when you run package, it's built in, so you just say package. Say the name of the package and the state. You want it present or you want it absent, which means uninstall it. Or you want it to be upgraded, and you can even give a list of packages. So that's how you install packages. It figures out what kind of system it's on. For Windows, you should use the specific Win package module instead. So you can auto-configure Windows machines also. And we also used pip, manages Python library dependencies. You say the name, which is the name of the library to install. And if you want it present or absent, or force it to upgrade, and probably a lot of parameters you're not going to use very often, you can give a specific version if you must. So what else can you do? File's interesting. File allows you to say on the system, this file on the remote system should have a certain permission, a certain owner. It's pretty much what it's for, or modification time. If you want to copy files, though, you got to run copy. So if you want to copy from your machine to the remote machine, you should use the copy module. And what that looks like, you don't need to say built-in, you can just say copy. The source is on your own machine, destination is on the remote machine, and what are the permissions? You don't have to give permissions, it'll just assume, like this. All right, then you've got things like template. If you do define a template in the template folder, then you'd say template, source template, and destination file. So the source should have a J2, the file on destination should just be a normal file, and it will replace variables if you've defined variables. And then something like service is important to know about. Service allows you to say something has been started or restarted. So these, exactly how it's named will depend on your system and the package. So sometimes the Apache web server is known as HTTP, sometimes HTTPD, sometimes it's known as Apache 2. So that will matter. But it's an easy way to ensure something has been started, stopped, or restarted. And is there anything else that's highly important here? Gets kind of interesting because instead of copying files to the remote system, you can actually just have it clone something. So that might be a good way to do things. Okay, they also have a Git repo of Ansible examples, and this is really good to look at. So something like LAMP stack, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, kind of a traditional web server environment. Mongo might be interesting too. You can go there and see, okay, so here's host, this is their inventory. You can call it host if you want. Their site YAML says, so here's what should be applied to everybody, the role common, all hosts. Remote user root is kind of like become true. I think it's the same. Then only the web, or the web servers in the inventory get the web role. and this is a description of it. And the DB servers in the inventory get the DB role. So here's some variables for the group. So DB servers has variables like this, and you'll see those mentioned in either the task or the template. So let's go look at the DB server role. DB role, tasks, main, install package. Here's a neat way to do a list of names. So run yum, which is package install. They could have used package, but I guess they knew they're on a Red Hat system. And name comes from with items. You can use item, variable, and with items. So all these will go one by one. And then here's a template. So the template's in the templates folder, and this is where it goes. Notify means once the action has been done, the Ansible should remember by the end, and before it finally quits, it should run the restart command so that MySQL gets the new config file if the config file changes. So we can go see where that command is defined. It's under handlers. So I talked about tasks and templates. There's also a folder you can make called handlers, and there you can say what it means to restart MySQL. It runs the service command. So these handlers, which are executed by notify, will be done at the end. So if lots of different commands notify the same thing to restart MySQL, it won't restart 15 times. It'll just do it once at the end. So that's what a handler is. And then here's that template. So you see the Jinja template. It's getting that variable MySQL port from the group. Oops, went too far. The group vars. All right, so there's the use of a variable in the template. If we look at Mongo, let's look at the roles. MongoD, maybe. Tasks, main. This one's more complicated. Probably more complicated than we need. Here's a pause command, that's interesting. Use of templates, source, destination, so forth. You can run direct commands, actually, if you want. But probably more than we need. What other ones would be good? Probably the simple one is the best. Let's look at what WordPress involves. So WordPress, here's installing PHP. All the PHP packages that they need. And it runs a command, moves a file, and then says, eventually you should restart PHP. And it also uses a template, and eventually you should restart PHP. So if either of these happen, or both, it'll just restart PHP once. So that's pretty much it. In review, docs.ansible.com is what you want. Ansible documentation here. And probably more specifically, collection index and the built-in. And then go down to modules, and these are things you can execute. And the examples, which is github.com/Ansible/Ansible examples.